Welcome to Pro Audio Perspectives. This week's show is a little bit different. I was interviewed recently on Benedict Haynes' podcast called The Self-Recording Band. It was really fun because he was really able to ask me a lot of questions that really aligned with my workflow and my methodologies and everything else, and I really had a great time. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I had fun being on the show. I really resonate with the idea that I don't balance it. I don't strive for commercial success. I don't strive for, commercial viability, any of that stuff, because at the end of the day, we're making art. And if you create something that you can resonate with, that you can, really value yourself, then that will be successful because you are the most passionate about it. You make music for yourself, not for your audience. And then when you do that, then your audience resonates with it because it's so personal and so emotional. So yes, of course, like if you want to sound like, XYZ band and you didn't double your guitars, then I'm going to recommend you double your guitars, But besides that, I'm not trying to strive for commercial viability at all.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I'm your host, Benedict Haynes. If you are new to the show, welcome. We appreciate you. This is the place where we help you make exciting sounding records from your home studio. If you are already a listener, welcome back. We always love to have you here. You already know what you're getting yourself into if you're listening to those episodes here on this podcast. Glad to have you back. This is available on Spotify and all your favorite podcast platforms, but it's also available in video format on YouTube. So if you weren't aware of that, just go over to the video version if you want to watch it and vice versa. All right. So today, as you see, I'm not here with my friend and co-host Malcolm Owen Flood as usual, but I'm very excited to be joined today by Brandon Dekora. Brandon Dekora is a mix engineer, producer, and he's won a Grammy Award actually, so he's the real deal. He's worked with artists like the Foo Fighters, Trent Reznor, Steven Wilson, Nine Inch Nails, many, many more are on the list there. We're going to talk about some of those things and how he was involved in certain projects, hopefully, but definitely knows what he's doing, definitely has some great advice on production, engineering, and if you don't know about him, now I'm very happy to introduce him to you. So, Brandon, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Thank you for coming to our show and sharing some of your wisdom and experience with our audience.
Of course, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so cool that this worked out. I should say you're not only a mix engineer and producer, you're actually also helping other people produce better and mix better, right? You're also doing some kind of mentoring or coaching, very similar to what we do here, actually.
A little bit. I was experimenting with some of it, and I'm still not certain that I'm going to go down that road. I might just leave that to you. But, I'm always happy to help my clients and happy to help out when people have questions. I'm always been the guy. If there's runners or someone below me, ask me any questions you got. I'm happy to answer.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's also a great mindset and approach in general. And I think something that's getting more and more important today we've actually talked before when I was on your podcast because you have an amazing podcast as well. And we talked a lot about pre-pro and helping artists, get prepared for the session or the mix or whatever. So I think that whole part actually gets more and more important. And it's really great to hear that you are willing and able to help people beyond just, the mixing job or whatever you're hired to do.
Yeah, of course. I've actually been kind of leaning in a direction of like almost co-production where I'm always happy to provide insights. If I hear something that could make the song, align with your vision even more, I'll always mention it, but I'm not trying to step on the producer's toes or trying to, produce or, get super involved, but I'm always happy to share what I think the song needs,
Of course. Yeah, totally. And you bring up an interesting thing here that is something that I wanted to touch on anyways. You said you were talking about the producer and how you work with other professionals involved in a project, which is something that not many people in our audience have a lot of experience with, I think, at least from the conversations that I have, because in the DIY world or like the indie band world, sometimes or often the producer is the artist. Or, I mean, they
Right.
might hire a mixing engineer, and maybe the mix engineer does some kind of remote production like I often do, or, things like that. But you come from a world and still work in that kind of world. And I do the same too sometimes, but probably you more than I, where there is an artist, but then there's also a producer and an engineer, and then you work with them, and then it's not
Right.
just the one artist doing it all and then sending it to you to mix, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do still work with producers. I've come from the world of big studios in LA where there is a lot of big time producers all over, and some of my best clients are actually producers that I work with, and they work, send me all their projects to mix and engineer and that kind of thing. So it's always exciting to work with people like that, because then you have someone that can kind of guide the journey. And as we spoke about before, I don't know if the listeners have heard our episode together on my podcast, but we did talk a lot about the role of the producer and how having a producer on the team can really improve the final product a lot more.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you want to listen to that conversation, you can go to Pro Audio Perspectives. If you just Google that, or if you click on our podcast page, there is a link to Brandon's podcast. We actually re-shared the interview on our channel as well, so you'll find the link. And the podcast is called Pro Audio Perspectives. I highly recommend it because there's lots of great guests on there, great questions also. I really enjoyed the questions you've asked, and listen to that episode. I had a blast there, and we talked a lot about that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, is the majority of the work you do these days working with those producers, like you say, or is it a lot of like bands recording themselves and sending you stuff to mix? Does that happen at all? I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of it is now working with bands directly that don't have producers. A large majority of my work is mixing. I do still have a few clients that are producers that, I work on projects with them, but most of my work is with bands that are producing themselves. So that's why I like to, chime in as, co-producer or even producer if you need help with that, and help with any additional, stuff that you need.
All right. Yeah, that's cool. We'll get to that and to the details of working with bands, and I have a couple of questions. But before we do that, I have one very different question, and that is, when I did my research here, and I mean, we've known each other a little bit at least because we've been in a sort of a program together, and then I had this episode and stuff, but I still obviously did my research here. And I found one thing that I wanted to ask you about, and this is, can you please tell us how your passion for music was triggered by an angry teenage sister? I just love that sentence.
So I wrote out in my bio recently, that's what he's talking about, is so when I was young, my oldest sister got in an argument with my mom. I was young. I was like 5 years old or something. And got in an argument, like screaming argument, and my sister stormed into her room and blasted Led Zeppelin so loud that the house shook. Like it was, and I had never really experienced music. I mean, I've obviously heard music before, but not to that level, not that loud, frankly. And it just really triggered something in me. It kind of, I hadn't really experienced the power of music in that sense before. And of course, afterwards, I, snuck in my sister's room and was asking her about what the music was and listening to stuff and all that as well. So it definitely triggered my interest. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. I love that story. That's great. So, but between that, you were 5, like you said, between that and then working with like big name artists, what happened in all those years in between? Like, how did you become a producer? What was your journey?
Right.
And have you been a musician yourself at all? Or did you go straight to the studio world?
Yeah, I started as a musician. I actually started on guitar when I was very young. I didn't really practice too long. It hurt my fingers and it was too hard. And I gave it up rather shortly. And then I picked up drums a little while later. And I became a drummer. I was in, little local high school bands and stuff like that. And that kind of triggered my passion for music even more. And, after high school, I was trying to figure out, what to do with my life like everyone does. And, I went to a concert local concert at a theater, and I saw the sound guy behind the board, and I saw the console and all the equipment, and I was like, that's really cool. I know I don't want to do live sound because it's too scary. But I was always interested in studio production and how, these amazing sounding records are crafted and created. And so I did my research, found a recording school, went and did that, and ended up in Los Angeles and, did the traditional route of, it's actually interesting. I was planning on going back home. I was living in Colorado at the time.
Okay.
Planning on going back home. And while I was in school, my entire family moved to California. Mm-hmm. One sister to San Diego, another sister to San Francisco area. My mom moved to Santa Barbara. And so there was not a lot left for me in Colorado. And then in the program, you had to do an internship. And so you had to start researching which studios you wanted to work at to provide it for the school to try and, get you positions. And looking at the studios, and they're all very small, studios, local studios. And I was like, well, if I'm really going to dive into this at the top level, LA is the place. Exactly. And so I came to LA, and I honestly still haven't been back to Colorado. I worked in various studios over the years, and as an assistant engineer, runner, worked my way up through all that, and eventually got opportunities to work with bigger artists, build my credit list, build my clientele, and I've been freelance for quite a while now, just mixing mostly and engineering sometimes, a little production, but yeah, that's kind of the summary of the story.
Awesome, thank you for that. That's really cool. Well, I think LA is not a bad place to be if you want to do what you're doing. So I think that's a really good decision. It's kind of funny between those two places, because like the mountain climber and trail runner in me would love to be in Colorado, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
But the music producer or musician in me is like obviously loving LA. So both of those places sound exciting to me. But for what you've been doing, LA is the better choice, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I still was shocked when I first moved to LA. I thought it was nothing but a concrete jungle. I didn't know there was mountains nearby. Like, I didn't know. I was so clueless on it. And when I moved here, it's like, oh, I still can go ride a bike or go on a hike or obviously go to the beach too. And, skiing isn't that far away either. And so it's definitely kind of the best of both worlds,
Cool. Yeah, awesome. That's great. So it's interesting that you've been a drummer. I didn't even know that. And I mean, we talked a little bit about it on your podcast, though, where we said like the drums have to be kind of spot on, and you can get away with quite a bit with guitars and other things sometimes, but the drums really have to be right. But like, do you think that drums are kind of something you're also really good at when it comes to engineering and mixing because you know it so well as a drummer? Like, do you think about drums maybe differently compared to an engineer who doesn't really know drums? Because I've learned that I'm not a drummer, but I learned to play drums because it's just fun and I love to do it. And while I was doing that, I figured that the better I got at drums, the better I could actually understand drummers, communicate with them, and then also make drums sound better just because I understood the instrument so much more. And I imagine like you being a drummer, that might have an impact because drums are kind of the most difficult and complex thing to work with in rock in a way. So do you think that helps at all? Or do you think differently about drums?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely remember a time when I was, sort of cutting my teeth in the studio when I would have, I'd work with my friends because I didn't, I was nobody cared to work with me. So I'd get my friends in the studio and we'd record, and I would specifically spend way longer than I should have, getting drum sounds just to try and figure out how to master that basically. So I definitely think that, being a drummer myself, I've certainly gone in that direction, and I definitely pride myself on drum sounds for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. So now I have the question, like the most important question of all for you in terms of drums, and it's one that like people have been fighting over forever, and it's a very important one, and it's drummer's perspective or audience perspective.
Oh, I always do drummer's perspective.
Yes.
And yes, I'm a drummer, but
yeah.
It was actually interesting because someone told me this story a while back, and it made perfect sense, is that whether you're a drummer or not, if you're listening to a song, you're going to be playing air drums.
Exactly.
And when you do this around the drums, if it doesn't pan that direction, it's disorienting.
Exactly.
And so That's the thing with me, you know.
Man, thank you so much. Thank you so much for saying that, because it's always an ongoing thing here on the podcast. My co-host and I, we are different. We have different opinions on this. He does audience perspective and I do drummer's perspective. But I'm totally with you there. And also I think that, I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter probably. But I think that the only people who really care about this would be drummers anyways. And so, you know, it's they want to hear drums. So yeah. I mean, anyway, that's cool. So let's get back to working with indie bands a little bit, because that's our audience here mainly. What are some of the, or maybe the biggest sort of problem that you see or hear over and over again when you work with bands? Is there one common thing or one thing you wish that everyone would just know about that is still ignored despite all the information out there?
I mean, that's tough because, I mean, my knee-jerk answer is drums, of course.
Yeah.
A lot of indie bands use programmed drums. Yeah. And I totally understand why, because it's expensive, it's complicated, to get it done right is you have to go to a studio or get really good at doing it yourself and get a treated room, and it's the most complex thing, like you said. But I still, like, I guess part of it is, unless you're a drummer yourself, it's difficult to get programmed drums sounding like real drums. And I do have a number of clients that are really good at programming drums. Quite frankly, they send me the tracks and I honestly don't even know if they're programmed or not, because they're that good. Yeah. You know, with all the plugins, now you can split it up based on the mics, and, you know, I just get the raw files and it sounds great. So I know that it can be done. It's just tricky when, you know, to learn that. It's like learning a new instrument. If you're a guitar player, you kind of have to learn drums a little bit, like you said you did, to sort of master that in a sense. So I would say that's the main thing, I think, you know.
I completely agree. I completely agree. It's either they trying to record real drums but don't know how to do it well and then they suck, or they try to or they try to program it, which like you said, I completely understand, but that has also, you have to also do that properly, and then they kind of struggle with that. And I think either way, especially with those people that do kind of solo projects where they're not a drummer, or like, you know, that can be very problematic, just because, if you don't know the instrument, you can also not program it really well. Sometimes we get sometimes we even get the occasional like octopus thing where they program things that can't be done on a real drum kit, and then you have to explain. Like, that's not possible. But like, so totally, I think that's true. And it's not easy to do, to be fair. Like, I totally understand that it's not something that you just don't wake up one day and can do it, really. But it pays off to learn that. And
that's actually another thing too, is like, it's not really like a hard line where, okay, now this is good and this is bad. Like, I've gotten stuff that sounds really great and it's just a little bit different vibe, you know. It's like, it's maybe clear that it's not real drums, but there's also a whole sort of subgenre that is that kind of programmed drum sound with guitars and with everything else, and that can be very cool. So I'm not saying that there's something that you definitely should not do. You know, it's art at the end of the day. So, you know, there's no rules.
Absolutely. And if you, like you said, if you use the right samples and you program it well and all of that, it's just like engineering real drums. You can get really great results because they are real recorded drums. And if you know how to work with that, you'll get an amazing result that sounds just as good. And it's actually, if you do it well, it's actually pretty hard to beat that with real drums, right?
So, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
So totally, I'm with you there. And then there's entire genres where even the machine gun thing is part of the aesthetic, so it's not always a terrible thing. So
exactly.
Tricky to get it right. Yeah, how did you learn? That actually brings up a very interesting topic, because it was just top of mind here in the studio yesterday. How did you learn which type of drum vibe or sound or tuning or choice of drums, shells, whatever? How did you learn how to know which of those things work for a certain song or genre? Because I remember I don't even know how I learned it, honestly, but when I remember that there was a time when I heard someone say, I don't think the snare drum fits the song really well. I was thinking, like, how can a snare drum serve a song or work or don't work within a song? I don't get it. It's just a noise, you know, you hit the thing, you know, and you like it or don't like it. I didn't really get it for a long time until I did. And yesterday we had an artist send us multi-tracks, and they were recorded very well. But then they added in the upload form that we have, they wanted a dry, classic rock, AC/DC type of drum sound, and with a dry, fat snare drum and stuff. And then I listened to the multi-tracks, and it was a very high-pitched, like funk snare kind of with like lots of overtones, very open, like nothing like an AC/DC kind of thing. And
Right.
and I was like, okay, so we need to, something's wrong here. But like, and that made me think about like, how do you actually learn that, and how did you learn that, like that drums need to fit the vibe of a song, and what to choose and all that, those things?
I mean, it's definitely a loaded question because, I mean, I guess like even that song you got yesterday, I'm sure that the drums that they sent could have worked. You know,
Absolutely.
it's just
if they didn't give me that info, I would have just run with it.
Exactly. It's just their preference of wanting that AC/DC sound and wanting something else. And so it's almost like anything can kind of work if you build it around it. Now, there's obviously, you can go into detail and like tune the drums to the key of the song and, you know, adjust the length of the snare rattles to be just the right length so it's not taking up too much room or too little room. You can really go into detail, but at the end of the day, like, honestly, 9 times out of 10, I will go with what has been given to me or what the drummer shows up with for the sound, you know? And it's like, if they say, oh, we're actually going for something else, like, well, why did you bring this drum then? You know, why is it, you know, like, let's work on getting it right. But it's, you know, because anything is possible, it's like, you can easily use what you have and make it work for whatever song, you know? And I think that's the end goal. Like, it's tricky to fall into the rabbit hole of, you know, oh, I want it to sound just like this AC/DC sound or this, you know, Foo Fighters sound or whatever it is, and send over exact references for that. But at the end of the day, you know, anything can work. So.
Oh, I'm with you there. Oh, that's cool. That's a good answer. Yeah. But did you still do a lot of like intentional listening, trying to figure out which kinds of bands use which kinds of sounds, or like, how do you even, like, I don't even remember, like I said, for me, maybe it just comes over the years, like with experience and just listening a lot. But did you ever do any intentional sort of research on that topic, like which kind of drum sounds for which vibe and which drum materials and whatever?
I mean, a little bit, like, obviously their references will play a big role, you know, if they have stuff that's heavily influenced by them, or oftentimes if, you know, if I have clients that can't decide on what references they think should be, like, I always say, like, well, what band would you open for? What band would open for you? What would you be playing a festival bill with? You know, what is similar stuff? And then you can go to that and see the sonic taste. Like, one thing I did recently, which was kind of eye-opening, is I put together a list of all my biggest influences, like growing up as a kid, you know, music-wise, and I was just listening for production cues and notes. And I realized that, you know, the vocal and a lot of other elements were really dry, really in your face. And so, you know, pulling from that, it was kind of eye-opening because frankly, I do use reverb, I do use effects, I do use all these things when I'm mixing, and to hear so many of my favorite things and realize that they're all dry is like, well, that's maybe a different aspect I could approach. And, you know, there's no rules. So it's, you know, it's always about experimenting and trying what works and doesn't work, you know.
Totally. I love that. I love that story. That also means that the learning never stops, right? We can be in this for like decades and work on big records or whatever, but we always still try to get better, and we always discover things that we could improve. So, or change every once in a while, maybe, you know, just mixing it up every once in a while, I think is important. That being said, do you have any sort of go-to things that you've always done still to this day? Maybe some really old plugin or some old technique or something that you just can't live without, that you've been using since forever? I mean, basically?
I would say there's two. It's a thing that's, you know, it's one of the things is to use the Eventide micro shift. It's a setting on the H3000 back in the day. Everyone used it. It just is a little bit of a spread. You know, it's like, it's pitched up on one side a tiny bit, pitched down on the other side a tiny bit, and then like a little tiny delay, like a few milliseconds here and there, just to make things a little bit wider.
You use an actual H3000 these days, or do you use the Soundtoys, like the microshift or something like that? Or?
Yeah. Eventide actually came out with their own version of it because Soundtoys did. And, Soundtoys is started by the guys that worked with Eventide originally. So they, it made sense that they did it. But I actually started using the immersive version because then I can, if there's any mixes that will need Atmos, I can easily just switch that to the immersive version and use it for Atmos as well. And it's cool. Really great for that. So
okay, cool. Okay.
Yeah, and then the other thing I said I was going to mention too is I want to say, actually, I wonder if it was the same engineer that taught me both of these. I kind of think it is. Anyway, use Lexicon 480 on the Buckram setting. It's this really obscure. I think it's under like the wild spaces folder or something, and it sounds terrible. Frankly, it sounds terrible.
I think I've never used that one, honestly. Yeah.
On a snare drum, if you add it just a little bit, it just lengthens the snare. It just gives it a little bit bigger room sound. Doesn't make it sound roomy like reverb. It just makes it a little bit longer. And it's great. It's awesome. I use it on almost every mix for sure.
See, those are the nuggets that I was looking for. Also, I think I did never use that patch on the like that you said on the 480. It's awesome. That's really cool.
It definitely sounds awful by itself, so don't turn it up too loud. Yeah. It's one of those weird things. It's like, this is it. This sounds terrible, but tucked in just right. It's amazing.
Wow, that's awesome. So cool. Thank you. Now, another interesting question, and it might be the same answer, but maybe not. What is one like unconventional thing you do, or maybe unpopular, unconventional opinion you have about mixing a music production that you really believe in, but most people will say it's wrong or whatever? Like, is there anything that you can think of?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that I really don't like to use drum samples. They've become so prevalent now with all mixing that I'm a drummer. I prefer a natural sound. And I'm not saying you can't get natural sounds with samples, but in order to use samples and get it more natural, you have to like bury them almost. It's just like a subtle effect where a lot of times in modern productions, the samples are so loud that it just sounds like a drum machine. It's this exact same hit over and over and over. And yes, there's plugins that will vary the volume a little bit and try and alter it, but I've just never been that person. And obviously, I do sometimes have to use samples.
Of course, yeah.
But when I can, I always try not to, And today, I think that's controversial for sure.
It is, yeah. I don't love that. Yeah, I'm with you there. I use drum samples a lot though, but I love it's ridiculous when you see how we do it here. We put so much effort into making that natural. I almost always avoid things like trigger, unless I really want one-shots for the aesthetic. But I always use a proper like library, like the Room Sound drum libraries, which are so amazing, or like Superior Drummer sometimes, or things like that. And then we would go like and really fine-tune all the velocities and the round robins and like all those things. It's ridiculous how much effort it takes to do that. But that's the only way. That's really the only way.
Right.
Because otherwise I can't stand it. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. But now here comes the thing.
Okay.
What do you say to a band if because I'm with you, like I said, but it only works if the drum performance and recording and all that is good enough. Like, but then there are bands who have that same opinion, and they tell you like they don't want drum samples, they want it all natural. But then you listen to the drums and you're like, well, I don't think I can get away with this. Like, and then sometimes it can be hard to convince that band to use samples and to be able to say like, well, but it will be better and still natural if we use some samples here. Like, what do you do in those situations? Did you ever get that? Because unfortunately, maybe it's just me, but unfortunately, many of the bands that are really against using drum samples are not necessarily the best bands or drummers or like have the best sound, so they are against it, but then at the same time they don't have the source tracks to really be able to support that. So
right, of course.
So,
it's tricky. I mean, it all comes down to communication, really. It's like if with any subject, if there's something that an artist wants that they haven't given me with their files, I'll talk to them. It's like, hey, look, I have to do this thing in order to get to this destination that you want to go. Yeah. I can try 2 different versions. Sometimes I'll do that, where I'll do with and without. I'll send over, like, okay, this is, what you really wanted was this reference track, and they clearly used drum samples. And I say you didn't want it, but here's a version with and without, and you can decide. And sometimes they still say, no, we don't want the samples. We get it. Thank you for doing that. But that way it gives them a choice, and it brings them into the conversation. The worst thing is to, make choices and say, well, this is what you want, so this is what I did. It's like, well, that's so different than what we've sent you that we don't like it and we're not comfortable and everything else. But, just to involve them in the process is the biggest thing for sure.
100%. Yeah. I'm glad you bring that up. It's like the communication really is everything. And, of course you want to serve the song and you want to do the best you can for the song, but at the same time, you are also, it's their vision. It's not your record, it's theirs at the end of the day. And it has to do with respect for the artist and with like being a good, listener, paying attention to what they really want. Sometimes they say one thing, but they actually mean something else. There's a lot of like reading between the lines sometimes, but all of those skills are so important when you work with artists. And yeah, at the end of the day, they need to be happy with the record, and we're there to do whatever we can to make that happen, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where I think also is, the difficulty sometimes with self-producing artists is that they think they want all these things and they don't want certain things, but they don't fully understand what's required to get it there.
Yes.
And so they try all these things and then they try to do it themselves, and then, they're not familiar with the techniques required to actually get those results. So enlisting professionals, even if it's a mixer that can help with those thoughts, or a producer or anything else, someone to, bounce ideas off of is critical for sure.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yep. Can you remember one like really eye-opening moment or like an aha moment in your career where you've worked with someone really impressive, maybe like a bigger artist, or it can be a smaller artist as well, but like something where you thought like, wow, that really changes everything for me. Like this is a very, impressive moment or whatever in your career?
I mean, I guess I'll have to tell a very quick story about Dave Grohl. I was working with the Foo Fighters, and Dave is a very talented musician, as most people know. But, there's different levels of it. Obviously, there's many musicians, famous and not famous, that are very talented. But with Dave, he would go and do a vocal, sing the vocal down, and then he'd do a double. But the key is that he did not want to hear the first vocal. He sings the double with nothing else, just by himself. And then you turn them both on, and they're so perfect and so tight that it's like, it's impossible to do it with it on that tight. It's almost phasing at times. Wow. And, that was incredible, because it's like, I've heard people, really talented singers, get doubles so tight that it's phasing, but I've never heard them do it without even hearing the other one and just blindly do it again, and then it's exactly perfect, the same exact thing. Wow. That's crazy,
That's crazy. Like, any specific reason why he does it that way? Like, did he say
I don't know. I don't know. That's just how he's always done it. He's never done it that way, and it works for him, obviously. So, it's crazy.
Wow. And that is such an important part of his sound. That's funny, too, because we had a group call in our coaching community earlier before this podcast today. And one of the questions in there was about recording vocal layers and doubles and harmonies and all that. And then I actually brought up the Foo Fighters example where he often has like a pretty loud mono double behind the lead vocal, and it almost has this like chorusy effect. And that's kind of his signature thing. It's a very important thing about the sound, and I had no idea that he does that without listening to the lead vocal.
Doesn't even hear it.
Insane.
It's crazy.
Yeah, because it was always impressive to me how tight it sounds, and I always thought obviously a good performance and probably a lot of editing, but it's like in this case it almost sounds like a chorus effect because it's like so tight, right? And wow,
exactly. And same with guitars too. When he lays guitars and he doubles guitars, it's the same thing. He turns off the original, lays it down
Really?
perfectly, turn them both on. It's like, it's crazy. His timing is so perfect. His timing and pitch are so good that he doesn't want to hear the original. It's crazy.
Wow. And what makes it even more impressive is that he also has, the energy and emotion. It's not like a boring,
Absolutely.
perfect performance, because there are people who can pull that off, but they're lacking like the energy and everything. But he anyone who's ever seen Dave Grohl perform, I think will agree that there's
Right. Absolutely.
So that's even more impressive that you can do it with that level of like consistency and still having that energy and emotion in there. Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Cool. That's a great story. Yeah, that's a moment for sure. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. It's awesome. Cool. So now back to your working with producers real quick and like on a team of people, I'd say. Is it something that does it ever happen to you that the band like contacts you and they want something and the producer wants something different, and then you kind of have conflicting information there? Or is there anything like do you always have this one clear person to talk to for every project like that? Or because I know these stories and I've experienced it myself, where sometimes the more people are involved, the more difficult it can be, and even worse if there's an AR person or whatever, and then it gets really complicated at times, Of
course. So usually I try to limit that. I mean, if it's a producer, then typically they're the ones talking with the band about notes and everything else, and they come to a consensus before they come to me with notes. I also when I'm mixing, I use a platform I do two things. I have a platform that I use where I can upload the mix and then they can input their notes directly on a web page. And different people can input different notes, and you just put your name and say, oh, Johnny wants the vocals up and Bob wants the guitars down, or whatever it is, So that kind of eliminates that, because then everyone else can see everyone else's notes. And if, Johnny put in notes about the vocals being too quiet, and Bob comes on and says, I want the vocals louder, it's like, well, make up your mind. You guys have to talk amongst yourself and figure out what you actually want, So that's one way that I approach it, is having that platform is super helpful, because then you can see everyone's notes, you can see all the different versions, you can go back versions and see everything, and it really makes everything really great. The other thing I do is I always encourage a video call. I have a system where I can stream high-res audio with a video, so we can talk about stuff. And I can stream it directly from my system, so you can hear it as if you're in the studio with me.
Cool.
And obviously host multiple people on the call as well.
Yeah.
So I can get the whole band on the call, get producer, everyone involved all together, and we can just have conversations. And that's even more valuable because, we can just talk about things. Like it's one thing to be more efficient, and it does help with efficiency, instead of, oh, let's turn the drums up. Okay, sure. And I'll turn it up and send a new version. And then, oh, that's a little too far. Can you split the difference? Yeah, sure. And that process just took 3 days.
Yeah.
Versus 3 minutes, like it should. But it's also the idea where when we're all in the room together virtually, is we can talk about why certain decisions were made, and what, like, even I was doing one of those calls the other day, and the client, said, I'm not sure what it is, but I really, I'm not hearing the vocals loud enough. Do we need to turn it up, or what's going on? It's like, oh, let me just sit for a minute and play with it. And, he was saying that I should turn up the volume by X amount. It's like, well, it's maybe not the right thing. So I messed with it for a while and, made the vocals more present and clear, and did not change the level of the fader. I did it with EQ and, a little compression, other things. And that was the answer that was needed. Instead of like, oh, I think that you should do X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, we can talk about it and decide why you want those things and what the core issue is, and then I can decide what the best choice of the best path to get us there, basically.
Yeah.
And so those things combined kind of eliminate that miscommunication, because sometimes you do go in circles, and that's inevitable. sometimes you want to change, and then you come back 3 revisions later. It's like, oh, can we go back? It's like, well, we did the opposite of that a few revisions ago. Are you sure this is what we're trying to do? And we can just have a talk about it. So, yeah.
Totally. Awesome. Love that. Yeah. Having good systems in place is critical, but also you are a good communicator, obviously, and that helps a lot. And
I try.
Yeah. It's like that's so important. And I don't know that. Thank you. That's really cool. And also, I don't know. I mean, I've never worked with you in on a project or something like that, but you seem to be also pretty calm and as weird as that sounds, but reasonable person, which is not always the case. Some people are overreacting quickly, maybe, or taking things personally when there's notes and stuff like that. And I have the impression of you that you are able to, take it as what it is, and then figure it out, and and to just stay calm and find a solution for everything, which is very important.
That's actually one thing I wanted to touch on too. Is I've been going down the rabbit hole more of finding good personality matches with my clients. Because it's, of course, a genre match, my past credits can, vouch for my work and all that. But if we don't get along, if we can't be friends, if we can't have a relationship, then it's not going to work. Even if I'm the perfect person for your genre and your style, if we can't do that, then it's never going to work. So that's one thing I've been really, pushing lately, is just making sure that we can have a relationship, that we're a good personality match for each other. So good, yeah. And sometimes you might know someone else who might be a good fit for that person, and you would think they would get along, and then you can refer them to someone else, and everybody wins as well. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah,
that's cool. Love that. So I want to actually give one question back to you that you asked me on your podcast, and that was
okay, sure,
because I loved that question. And honestly, I even got a few emails from listeners of I don't know if they're listeners of your show or mine or both, but I got a few emails, and all of them, that's the funny thing, all of them were about this question, or they pointed out the fact that this was such a great and also tough question to answer. So I want to give it back to you, and this is: how do you balance artistic integrity with commercial viability?
Right. So
or commercial success.
It's a tricky question. That's why I like to ask it. It's a controversial question. And me personally, I really resonate with the idea that I don't balance it. I don't strive for commercial success. I don't strive for, commercial viability, any of that stuff, because at the end of the day, we're making art. And if you create something that you can resonate with, that you can, really value yourself, then that will be successful because you are the most passionate about it. You make music for yourself, not for your audience. And then when you do that, then your audience resonates with it because it's so personal and so emotional. So yes, of course, if you want to sound like, XYZ band and you didn't double your guitars, then I'm going to recommend you double your guitars, But besides that, I'm not trying to strive for commercial viability at all. So.
Love that. Yeah, I mean, there's always best practices, and like you said, if you have a certain goal, there's things it's a good idea to do. But yeah, I love that answer. Did you read the Creative Act at all, the Rick Rubin book?
It's on my list. There's been 3 or 4 people that have talked to me about that, and I bought it, and I just haven't had a chance to start it yet. So
and even better is listening to it because he himself reads it, and it's almost like a guided meditation kind of thing. It's really,
nice.
Really, it's really cool. His calm voice.
I follow him on Instagram, and I see all his little clips and stuff and his little meditational type things, and that's funny that he narrates the audiobook too. That's cool.
Totally. It's an experience for sure. The first couple of chapters, I was like, I don't know if I want to finish this. It starts off a little weird, and is what was a little too much for me even, but then it got I loved it. I ended up loving it. So, and you're gonna like it too, I'm very sure.
Nice.
And he even says pretty much what you just said. The audience comes last. It's literally what he says. So,
right. Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, love that answer. Cool. Great. Awesome. So one more question here that has nothing to do with what we've been talking about previously, but I'm always interested in hearing answers to that. And that is, If you could meet and work with one artist or producer or anyone in the music industry, and time travel is totally allowed, doesn't matter if alive or dead, like anyone, who would it be? Who would you love to meet and work with?
I mean, it's kind of a tricky thing because I have been fortunate where I've met a number of my idols. I've met a number of my biggest that I've been huge fans of. And most of the time it's amazing. Most of the time they're very sweet and very nice and very talented, and it's an amazing experience. Every once in a while, it's like peeking behind the curtain in Wizard of Oz, where you can see, oh, I put them on a pedestal and they're not quite as good as I thought they were.
Yeah.
Or, that kind of thing. It doesn't happen often, granted.
Yeah.
But occasionally it does, and that's more of a letdown than like I would rather not meet them at all than have that happen. I would rather just leave them on that pedestal and, be a fan than to find out that, they're a jerk or they're, not great or whatever it is, So I hesitate to even answer that because I'd rather leave it there than actually meet some of my idols,
Cool.
I don't know if that non-answer is valid, but
totally. You got great answers, man. You got great questions on your show, and you also have great answers to these. That's awesome. So I got one more of these though. It's a two-parter this time, and that is, let's start with the first part. Is there a certain sound or vibe or something that you've created on a record that you've worked on that you are particularly proud of, like something you remember where like to this day you're like, yes, I really like how I made that thing sound?
I mean, that's difficult too because I mean, I love everything I do, of course, but but no, it's there are some albums that are more unique than others that have sonic stamps on them that the client really wanted to do. Like there's some albums that wanted to do more of like a Black Keys sort of lo-fi vibe to it. And, I was able to do that and it sounded really cool. Other artists that wanted, a big, massive pop rock sort of production, and I was able to do that and it was really cool. And so it's like, I don't know what to answer that as because I enjoy the process of seeing the artist's vision come to completion. I enjoy the process of crafting something unique for each artist that fits their music, And so that's more exciting to me than one particular thing that it sounded great, So, again, a non-answer, I guess, but
no, totally get it. Totally get it. It's probably having a happy artist and they telling you that they love it is way better than you thinking that something sounds great that you've done.
Right.
So,
and usually whenever they love it, I also love it too. Yeah. Because like their vision is very clear and very unique and cool. And it's like, oh yeah, would be really fun to create that with you. And let's try this out and let's make it work and let's do that. So,
cool.
Absolutely.
Love it. Is there, and now the second part of this question, is there any, I mean, you don't sound like a person who's chasing like a lot of references and stuff. You talk often about like how unique and exciting things are important to you, but like, is there a certain sound that you've been chasing forever or trying to achieve, but for some reason just couldn't figure out yet?
I mean, not really, because it's almost like, that's why I'm always happy to answer questions with people and happy to educate people and happy to share my knowledge, because you can take the exact same settings that someone used and apply it to your music and it doesn't sound the same. And so every time I'm creating a mix, even though, for example, an artist would I definitely want it to sound exactly like this other production. And I can try my hardest to get it to sound exactly like it, but it's not ever going to be exact. And so it's like, sometimes I beat myself up because it's like, oh, I wish I could get it a little closer. I wish I could get it a little farther, but it's it's unique. Every time I pull up a song, it's going to sound a little bit different, So as far as, trying to achieve something that I can't, I don't think I ever can achieve the exact thing that they want because their source material is different. And that being said, again, we can create something unique that's similar and very close to this other thing, but also has unique characteristics because every song is different. Every performance is different. So it's about finding that unique stamp that we want to put on it and crafting that.
Cool. Yeah, awesome. Again, great answer. love these answers. They're way better than what I expected. This is very much more interesting
awesome.
than just being like, well, yeah, that's just one sound. That's way better. and it's also funny that anyone who's ever tried to recreate something has probably figured out that you can get close, but that's not the point. In it, it's actually a pointless thing to do. Actually, in most cases, so it's like I've actually
have a story of where it was long ago when I was an assistant and we were on a project. I think it was, I forget the exact artist, but they did what Taylor Swift did, where they wanted to recreate their back catalog and re-record it so that they could, get the licensing money that's not, attached to the label-owned recordings. And so we went to the studio and we recreated it, and same thing. We got really, really close, but it's not ever going to be exactly like the original, Same thing with, honestly, with even mixing, where, again, when I was assisting years ago, during the days of Guitar Hero and all those video games where, all those songs were on, in order for those games to have those parts where the guitar got super loud or the drums got loud or whatever part it was, they needed the stems for the mixes. And almost all of them didn't exist. And so there were teams of people that were remixing all these old songs to be exactly like the current mix, but then print stems so that we could have it for the separation of the video game. And there were numerous projects where we spent all day trying to get the mix the same, and it was pretty damn close. But again, it's never exact. It's never perfect, So it's all about, creating the best you can with what you have, basically.
Fascinating, yeah. That's actually fascinating. Even if you have to go back on the same project and there was a bunch of revisions and then you have to go back to a previous mix, and for whatever reason maybe you didn't do a save as, or you don't have the exact version from 5 days ago. Even doing that is tricky. I had a hard time sometimes matching my own mixes from just a few days ago. Yeah, if that happens. So.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, totally get it. Yeah, totally get it. And I remember I was on and it's also cool about the Guitar Hero thing, because many people are not even aware what goes into making that, and all that. So that's cool. Sharing that. Right.
There was a project we did where we were remixing Roxanne by, with not Sting, but the other one. Anyway, I'm totally blanking on the name. Anyway, Roxanne. But Sting was singing, and they did the mix. It was all analog, of course, and so they did the comping of the vocals. Sorry, that's the one quick now? Pause for the cat feeder. Yes,
you warned me. Yeah,
the cats are running. So one thing that we had to do was they did all the comping of the vocals on the console with mute automation. And so when we pulled up the multi-tracks, there was 5 or 6 takes of vocals, and we didn't know which one was actually used in the final song. And so we had to go line by line, listen to every single line, and recreate that comp that they made with console mutes. And so it's little things like that. It's you don't think about all the time and work that people put into just to create these, stems for the video game. That's crazy.
That's funny. Yeah, totally crazy. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I remember listening, I don't know which podcast it was, but I think I heard, it was Andrew Sheps definitely talking about how he was always fascinated by what Chet Blake does and tried to recreate whatever he was working on. And he even got, he called him and got the exact same plugins and settings and chains and everything. And just, he was like, it was nowhere near what Chet Blake was doing. I had the exact same tools, the same settings, everything, but it just sounded like crap in my sessions, and I just ended up not ever trying that again because Jack can do that, I can't, So
yeah, exactly.
So that happens. Yeah, really cool. That's
awesome.
super interesting. What are you doing mostly like currently now? Because I remember on your podcast you told me that you actually thought about getting more into production again. It wasn't a decision you made, but you said like maybe you were thinking about like even doing more production again and not just mixing. So has that happened yet, or what are you working on right now currently?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still mostly doing mixing. I'm open to doing production. I have done a little bit of it lately, but it's also where, like I said earlier, I'm open to doing co-production as well.
Yeah.
Like I'm happy to come on the project as a mixer and just offer little production changes or little tweaks that can help the song, instead of like starting with a band from the very beginning and going, okay, let's go to the rehearsal studio, let's work out arrangements, let's work out all these different things that a producer does. Again, I'm happy to do that as well, but I'm open to whatever it looks like, basically. Still mainly doing mixing.
And any projects you're currently working on that you can share or that are coming up or anything? Anything you're excited about?
I've done a number of projects with a band called Blue Widow. That's really cool. I just finished up one more song that should be coming out relatively soon with them, and I'm about to do another album from an artist named Chris Newcomb.
Okay.
Smaller artist, but it's his first major album. We did one song already, and we're about to start with the whole rest of the process, and that's going to be, I'm not sure when the release date will be, but there's a number of projects for sure.
That's cool. That's awesome. Yeah, and but most of them mixing still, and then
yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I am asking because I really think that we actually need more producers again. Like everyone turns to like all the producers. It seems like many of them turn to mixing and stop producing, and bands do it all themselves and whatnot. But I really think we need good producers again. Like I can tell from like the stuff that I'm hearing out there that we're in desperate need of producers or people teaching people how to produce properly, one or the other. But people need to know about production. And
there is one other project where the client hired me to mix, and then I was like, okay, we're definitely going to do the mix, and then let me just get the song's not finished yet. Let me just wrap it up in the next few weeks and I'll get back to you. And he messaged back a few weeks later. It's like, look, I'm having a really hard time. Like, can you please help produce this with me? I need more than mixing. And so I was happy to. And I helped him work through the arrangements of the songs and kind of revisit a few things. And it was interesting because it was all remote. It was all over the internet. He lives in a different state. And so we were able to do it that way. And, I'd offer suggestions and he'd make changes and come back and with updates, and then eventually we got to the point where it was finished, and I mixed the whole thing, and we just wrapped it up. And he's working on a release plan. I think it's going to come out next year, but it was really interesting to do that process remotely because I haven't done a remote version of that before. And so because obviously if you can go to the rehearsal studio with the artist, then as a producer that can be really helpful, but to do it in a remote way was great as well. Honestly, it really worked out well. So that was cool.
That's good to hear. Awesome. Very cool. Yeah. Very exciting. And so,
awesome.
Before we wrap this up, there is the probably kind of a boring question because it's asked on so many podcasts, but I still always enjoy it.
Okay.
And that's the desert island piece type of question. So is there one plugin or one piece of gear that if it's the only one you could ever use or whatever, or the only one you like, the one thing you can't get rid of?
I mean, it's difficult to say just one because, sorry, my cat is trying to walk on the computer and end our conversation.
Let's assume. Okay, let's assume you have a pair of speakers and like you can make obviously the computer or something would be the thing, but like let's assume
that's
you have the
basics
thing, but like so
we have solar panels to power the whole system.
Exactly.
Okay,
let's assume you have a pair of speakers and a DAW and a computer. Though so
right. I mean, I would say like. Let me answer that with a story.
Oh yeah, those are the best.
When I was an assistant, I was working at a studio, and there was people coming in doing mixes a lot. So I was able to watch people mix. And one engineer came in, and he wasn't really happy with the outboard gear in the room and the equipment in general. And so he's like, it was a big budget project. He's like, screw this, let's rent all this gear. And we rented mountains of gear. Like literally, it was almost to the ceiling, stacked up. It was like a whole studio's worth of equipment. And we wired it all up, and his mix sounded amazing. Don't get me wrong. It was great. The next day, someone else came in, plugged in one reverb and a compressor on the vocal, and it sounded amazing. He used the console for everything else, nothing but the EQs on the console. And so that really taught me that, it's the cooking, not the kitchen. Yeah. It's how you use the gear. It's how you can get the results. And I hate to sound so cliche with it, because that is a common answer, but I've seen it firsthand, and I've seen it happen. And I know that, with the, there has to be a certain threshold of the quality of the gear. Let's start there. Like, it can't be, the $10 piece of equipment off of eBay or whatever it is that's total garbage, and you put something through it and it sounds worse. Yeah. It can't be that, obviously. Yeah. But as long as the general quality level is there, you can kind of use anything. And so to answer that question, I could be happy with the DAW and the default plugins if I really had to be. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because I've trained myself enough to be able to use those tools and use whatever I need to get those results. And yes, a really great, well-stocked kitchen makes the job easier. It's not necessary. Yeah. So,
yeah, agreed.
It's kind of tricky,
Yeah, but great answer again. I mean, ever heard an Andy Wallace mix? He uses the console and nothing but the console, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Like
exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, totally. Love that. Cool answer. Now, if people want to work with you and hire you to remote produce or mix or both or record and go to a studio, whatever, where can they find you? How can they contact you? And how does the process typically go? Is it just, if anyone's interested right now, which I assume they are, how does that work? Like, how do they contact you and what happens then?
I mean, the best way is through my website, brendandekora.com. I'm also on Instagram and all the places. How it works is I like to get on a call with people. There's so many times when, you hire someone remotely and it's just through email and it's very impersonal and transactional. I feel that as a mixing engineer, my role is not just to make things sound better, but to be a part of the process, to identify what the vision is, to talk to people, to build a relationship. My ultimate goal is to become friends with my clients and to build an ongoing relationship. So we get on a call, we see if we're a good fit, and, I send a proposal, all the information you need to get started, and we go from there.
Awesome. I love that. And I didn't expect anything less than that. Like, that's awesome. No, that's the way to do it, man. Like, they'll just send out an email and that's exactly. Yeah. Cool. So go to brendandekora.com. You'll also find Brandon's podcast there, as I said, Pro Audio Perspectives, really great show, great guests on there. You might recognize, Matt Boudreau, Working Class Audio, and a couple of other great people on there. And then on the website, you find plenty of information about Brandon and your work. And just get in touch through the website, have a conversation with him, and see if it's a good fit. And I think what really, what gets across in a conversation like that is that there's nothing you can lose by doing that, because Brandon will tell you if it's not a great fit, and it's not just something where someone is trying to sell you something that you don't need. It's just, it has to work for both parties, and that's the only way you can create great art. So if you're at all interested in that, and if you like his work, contact him, and you'll see.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great. Wow. So thank you so much for taking the time again to do this, Brandon. This was really cool. If we get any questions from our audience, because we always tell people to just email us, or they can send text messages, and then we have the coaching community, of course, and all of that. So if there's any follow-up questions or anything like that, can I send them your way? I don't know if there's going to be any, but cool.
Happy to answer.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Really cool. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Cool.
All right. That's it for
Awesome.
today. See you next week. Thank you so much for listening. And bye, Brandon. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.